Is that what that says?
That is what the text says.
Following that paragraph is a quote by Iowa Secretary of Agriculture Bill Northey. Part of that quote states, that people are trying to get grain into the state. Do you see where it says that, Mr. Northey's testimony, or his quote?
It says
That people
I
are
know
trying
folks
to
are
get
trying
grain
to get corn
into
in
the
this summer
state.
and have had trouble getting stuff
Do you
in
see
from
where
other
it
areas.
says that,
Yes.
Mr. Northey's testimony, or his quote? That corn, the people are trying to get into the state during the
says,
summer. That people
I
are
know
trying
folks
to
are
get
trying to
grain
get corn
into
in
the
this summer and
state
have had
to
trouble
ethanol
getting
plant.
stuff
Do you
in
see
from
where
other
it
areas.
says that,
Yes.
Mr. Northey's
That's
testimony?
one place it could be going, yes.
So that would signify that there's a demand for corn coming into the state. That's during the summer that this quote was made, right?
I believe that's true, that some years Iowa is a net importer of corn, and then it would be processed by the ethanol plants, and then the ethanol plants would therefore get to deal with the freight congestion, the rail congestion, and the higher freight costs.
I'm going to ask for an instruction against, for you to only answer the question that I've asked.
Mr. Dubinsky?
Your Honor, I think yes, a lot of these questions are complex. We have expert witnesses here to try and inform the board as much as possible. I think that the witness ought to be given a fair opportunity to answer. I don't think she's said anything that's excessive or taking up an inordinate amount of time. I think that her answer is a complete and correct answer and ought to be permitted.
Your Honor, I asked about importing of corn. She then went on to tell me about the problem with ethanol plants and rail after the corn is processed.
Your Honor, he asked about the use of corn
She
for ethanol. She was
had a
giving a
chance-
complete answer.
Mr. Dubinsky, please
She
let
had
Mr.
a
Swinton
chance to
finish.
shape her testimony in both her direct and her rebut. She got a chance to say everything she wanted to say. Now it's our opportunity to shape the testimony. If there were more things that need to be said, other people in this room can follow up, whether it's my co-counsel, whether it's the OCA or the board. If Mr. Dubinsky believes that I cut off his witness unfairly, he's welcome to object, but this is not an example of that.
Your Honor, her answer is within the scope. He asked about corn use of ethanol. Frankly, there are co-counsel on that side of the table that testified more in their questions yesterday than Ms. Cub just did in her answer.
Do you have anything further?
I'm not sure that yesterday's testimony is relevant to my objection to this witness's answer.
Well, I would agree with that, but just hold on one second. The board has found that in some of the answers to the questions being asked, that there is not a direct response, and we're requesting that the witness answer the question that's being presented to them. We are also advising council that you have the opportunity to redirect should that opportunity come up. But we did find yesterday that some of the answers went a bit lengthy and didn't answer the questions. So we're asking that your witnesses answer the questions that are provided to them. Are there any questions? You may continue.
If Iowa is a net importer of corn some summers, is that likely to increase the spot market for corn in Iowa?
Not necessarily.
So the shortage of corn from Iowa farmers isn't going to increase the price paid to Iowa farmers for that corn.
No, it might increase the price that end users pay for corn that they import from Minnesota or wherever they're importing it from, but it would not necessarily increase the price received by Iowa farmers.
A proportion of your direct testimony and part of your reply testimony is based upon Exhibit EK1, which is entitled Rail Service Challenges in the Upper Midwest, Preliminary Analysis of 2013-2014 Situation. Would you agree that much of your testimony and reply testimony is based upon that document?
Some of my testimony is based on this document, yes.
Now, turning to page 1 of EK1, which is the title page,
Yes.
at the bottom, it says, this document was prepared at the request of Senators Thune and Klobuchar. Do you see that?
Yes, a request by Senators Thune and Klobuchar.
Senator Thune is a senator from which state?
He is the senator from South Dakota.
And Senator Klobuchar is a senator from what state?
I'm not familiar.
Minnesota. Would you disagree with that she is a senator from Minnesota?
I believe that's possible.
Page 3 of Exhibit EK1 in the third paragraph, third line from the bottom of that paragraph, appears to define Upper Midwest as Minnesota, North Dakota, Montana, and South Dakota, does it not?
That is how it is defined here.
Turning to page 7 of Exhibit EK1.
Yes, sir.
The third paragraph down under the heading Rail Service Problems of 2013 and 2014. The last paragraph of that two-sentence paragraph says, the effects of reduced rail capacity were most significant in the upper Midwest, in Minnesota, Montana, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Do you see where it says that?
These authors wrote that it is most significant in the upper Midwest, which is not to say it was insignificant in neighboring states.
My question for you was, do the authors of this report say the effect of reduced rail capacity were most significant in the upper Midwest, in Minnesota, Montana, North Dakota, and South Dakota?
They do.
I only found one example of the freight prices and the effect in Iowa in Exhibit EK1. Is there more than one example that relates directly to Iowa?
There was one major data point that they used from Iowa.
And is that the study that they did from the price of shipping soybeans from Council Bluffs to New Orleans?
That is the major data point they used, yes.
Do you know how many, and I'm sorry, I don't know the measurement. Do they measure it in bushels, tons?
Bushels typically.
Do you know how many bushels a year are shipped, Iowa soybeans are shipped from Council Bluffs to New Orleans?
I do not.
Mr. Babcock, in his testimony on page 6, says that only 10% of soybeans from Iowa are grown in the crop reporting district around Council Bluffs. Do you disagree with that statement?
I would have to review that source of that data, but I don't automatically disagree with his statement.
He also states then that 15% of the Iowa soybean crop is grown in the crop reporting district immediately north of Council Bluffs. Are you equally unable to disagree with that?
I am equally unable.
This is a challenge for me, and I had to do it longhand. But assuming that 14% of that 25% were shipped by rail, that would mean that only the worst case scenario for our Iowa farmers, 14% times 25%, makes it 3.5%. Is that right?
Well, I don't think it's appropriate to use the 14% on those reporting districts. 14% was an overall figure for the state. And due to the market conditions for soybeans in Iowa, we know that there's a larger proportion in these western sections. So if we can do our own, if I can engage in a little of my own longhand math.
Do it slowly for me, for my
Sure.
purposes.
If we go back to page 6, the map that you pointed out with 14% of Iowa relying on grain rail transportation versus the 39% in South Dakota, for instance. And this isn't a total Iowa grain figure, but Iowa corn, for instance, in 2014 was 2.4 billion bushels.
Okay, go ahead.
South Dakota corn in 2014 was 760 million bushels. 14% of 2.4 billion bushels is a larger, more significant overall volume of corn than 39% of 760 million bushels.
But we still come back to the point, my point, of 3.5%. The worst case scenario is 3.5%.
No, I disagree with your characterization that those regions shipped only 14% by rail.
Can you show me in the materials that you have supplied support for your statement that rail is more predominant in the western part of Iowa than it is elsewhere?
I'm basing that on my judgment as an analyst of the cash market.
So there is nothing in these documents that supports that. It's just your experience.
Yes, sir.
And you're testifying on behalf of Dakota Access Pipeline, is that right?
Yes, sir.
On Gannon Exhibit MI3, page 7, it states that Bakken oil.
Mr. Swinton, can you wait till we get
Sure.
that up for the witness? Could you please restate the exhibit number? Gannon exhibit.
MI3, page 7.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Swinton, is this the correct exhibit?
I don't know what that exhibit up there is, but my exhibit is labeled MI3, page 7 of 16. We had it pulled up yesterday at one point.
Mr. Swinton, could you direct us to the correct page?
If you could stop it, if you're going through page by page, stop at page 6, because my question goes from page 6 into page 7. Under the heading crude petroleum movements, it says, of the oil produced in the Bakken region, roughly 63% is shipped by rail. The destinations of these rail shipments include oil refineries along the East Coast, Philadelphia, Delaware, and southern states as Louisiana and Texas. In Iowa, the oil is shipped on a BNSF line running south along the border of Iowa and Illinois. Do you believe that Bakken oil shipments are shipped down the line near Council Bluffs?
Can we scroll to the next page? They may be. From this statement, I can't make a conclusion. I don't understand if this is running east-west along the southern border or if it is that BNSF line going south through Council Bluffs. But I suspect that crude oil ships on many directions through Iowa.
This is from a document from the Iowa Department of Transportation entitled 2013 Iowa Rail Trends. Would you assume, based upon the language that was just read, that the majority of Bakken oil coming through Iowa ships down the Iowa-Illinois border?
I have not reviewed this document before, and I'm not going to make a judgment about the majority or the relative quantities. What I rely on or what I have relied on in my testimony to look at the paths of crude oil moving through Iowa, I can point you to a map in Exhibit EK3. If we want to pull this up, I can find it. Exhibit EK3, page 19. This is a map from the Energy Information, EIA. And to me, this suggests that crude oil is moving from the Bakken both east across Iowa and also south to the Gulf by rail.
I'm guilty of putting up some unclear maps and graphs so far in my testimony that I've asked for the last 2 days. But as I look at this map, it doesn't look like any oil is coming down the western border of Iowa.
I respectfully disagree.
You built no model of your own to demonstrate the effect of oil transport by rail on grain prices in Iowa. Is that right?
That is incorrect. For this paper that I wrote for the American Farm Bureau, Exhibit EK3, I built a model that simulated freight flows nationwide. To the extent that Iowa is the #1 producer of grain in America, it's very relevant to Iowa.
You did not build a model solely for the purpose of demonstrating the effect of oil transport by rail on grain prices in Iowa.
No, I have reviewed Iowa-specific grain bids, individual grain bids, across many years, the past 5-6 years. But no, I have not built a model specific to Iowa.
If you did build a model specific to Iowa, would you take into account that, well, let's back up. I would like to look at the direct testimony of Bruce Babcock, Exhibit BB, page 6.
Mr. Swinton?
BB, page exact, Gannon Exhibit BB4, excuse me, page 6 of 10.
For everyone's convenience, when we are calling on exhibits that are from an party that you're representing, name the party first, then the witness name, and then the exhibit number, so that we can find it quickly. There's no guarantees on that, but that we can find it as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Your Honor, I will. This document is from the Association of American Railroads. Are you familiar with that group?
I am.
Under railroad coal traffic, halfway down the page, in the second paragraph, it states halfway through the paragraph, put another way, Class 1 railroads originated 1.6 million fewer carloads of coal in 2014 than in 2008. If you built a model for Iowa, wouldn't you have to take that into account?
Absolutely, and I would not necessarily just take these 2 years into account. I would take longer-term trends.
Exhibit EK, excuse me, let me try that again. EK-1 on page 44 acknowledges its weaknesses in trying to determine the cost of railroad freight on Iowa grain.
Specific to Iowa?
No, it says the weaknesses of the study on page EK-1, 44.
Where on the page should I be looking, sir?
In the first paragraph, it states, several factors came together in the fall of winter of 2013, resulting in significant challenges for rail shippers in the upper Midwest. These are under the conclusions. When we agreed earlier that for the purposes of this study, Upper Midwest did not include the state of Iowa. Would you agree?
Yes, sir.
I just want to make sure I'm looking at the right thing. There's nothing on that page that says weaknesses of the study, is there? Are we on the same exhibit?
Please restate the page number.
Page 44, 47. Let me rephrase it. I don't want to get in a battle of semantics. But there are some limitations of this study listed under conclusions, and we're going to explore them. So the first limitation of this study is that it's confined to the upper Midwest. Would you agree?
This study was specific to the upper Midwest. It included data from Iowa, and I believe it's appropriate to apply these conclusions to neighboring states.
We talked about that in this whole study, there's only one data set with respect to Iowa, and that was the shipping of soybeans from Council Bluffs to New Orleans. Is that right?
That is a significant data point, yes.
The next limitation is in the third paragraph under conclusions, which states, these price impacts are similar to earlier studies that also show a large degree of uncertainty in the explanatory power of transport-tail rail costs to explain changes in local commodity prices. Would you agree that that's a limitation for this study?
I would not use the word limitation. I believe that the authors are being very academically rigorous here, and they've put together a very good model.
Turning to page 45. In the first full paragraph, first sentence, it says, the estimated impact of increased transportation costs on crop cash receipts is a rough estimate. Is it tough to estimate the transportation? Is it tough to estimate exactly how much price of freight affects the price of crops received by the farmer?
Sir, I would say it's not only tough, it's impossible to come up with an itemized, exact invoice of how much this affected the industry. That's why we are making these estimates.
I have nothing further.
Mr. Taylor?
Thank you. Is this on? First of all, let me clarify.
Okay, pull it,
Is it on?
you need to pull it closer.
I was almost swallowing it.
There you go.
Let me I try to clarify something first. The 14% figure that's set forth on page 2 of your direct testimony says that rail transports a significant percentage, 14% of grains for Iowa. Now, I wasn't clear in your response to Mr. Swinton. Is that 14% just in Iowa, or is that an average over several states?
This is data from the Department of Transportation that is statewide. That's a statewide figure for Iowa.
And then on page 3 of your prepared testimony, starting at line 19, you say the problems in rail service were caused by increased demand to ship coal, grain, and oil. What percentage of those rail shipments were coal, what percentage were oil, and what percentage were grain?
If you'll give me a moment, we'll find some percentages for you in my Exhibit EK3. Well, I guess we'd have to do the math exactly, but in Exhibit EK3 on page 9, figure 13, you don't have to pull it up because I'm just going to say these. These are 2015 freight projections from the Department of Transportation. The percentage of coal by rail or rail traffic allotted to coal in their 2015 projections is 43%. Their projection for ag and food products is 12%. Their projection for oil and industrial products is 7%.
So apparently most of the rail traffic is from coal, is that correct?
That is historically correct.
And in fact, oil was the least amount in terms of percentage, correct?
That is correct. And my judgment here is that it is the timing of this surge in oil traffic as well as the routes that it's taking that caused the congestion.
On page 4 of your reply testimony, you say that since the 2013-14 period that you were focusing on in your direct testimony, the market has relaxed significantly since the worst congestion occurred. Is that the grain market, or what are you referring to there?
On line 14,
Page 4 of your reply testimony, line 17.
line 17. Earlier on line 14, the secondary market for freight on U.S. grain shuttle trains.
And that's for grain, correct?
Grain shuttle trains, the freight itself, yes.
Okay. So the congestion due to the grain harvest has relaxed since that unique time period in 2013 and 14, correct?
No, what this is explaining is that the congestion on the overall rail market, the overall rail system, the freight infrastructure has relaxed since that congested time period in the 2013 to 14 marketing year and the 2014 to 15 marketing year. Due to that, the secondary market for freight on U.S. grain shuttle trains has relaxed.
Let me go back to page 3 of your direct testimony. I apologize for skipping around.
That's no problem. My mind works the same way, I think. Page 3, yes.
Starting at line 19 again, you mentioned increased volumes of crude oil at that particular time you were focusing on. Do you know what the experience has been in the Bakken region for oil production since then?
Since when? I'm sorry.
Since the 2013-14 time period you were focusing on.
I have some general knowledge of it, rough knowledge.
Can we get a Sierra Club Exhibit 22 up on the screen, please? Thank you. Would you agree on the left-hand side, the charts show the oil production for the Bakken region?
New well oil production per rig. Yeah.
And if we can scroll down that page, please. As you look at that, would you agree that the production in the last several months to a year has gone down?
This chart that we're scrolling down to, showing from October to November, is showing a reduction.
So it has gone down in the last several months, correct?
From October to November, that is what this is showing, yes.
And that would certainly free up the rail system for grain and other commodities, would it not, compared to what you were focusing on?
In this short time frame, yes. And that's the experience that freight is showing. Whether this will continue or not, I cannot say.
Help me understand the rail congestion that you spoke about in your testimony. Was that caused by lack of train cars, a lack of engines to pull the cars, or a lack of track access, or what?
I believe all of those factors you just listed played a role.
Well, in terms of the rail cars, the types of rail cars used to haul grain are not the same kind of cars used to haul oil, correct?
That's correct.
So there wouldn't be a lack of oil cars because of excess grain cars, whether the cars are still there. They're different kinds of cars.
Potentially, if both categories of commodity have increasing traffic at the same time, the railroads that are trying to buy those cars, to fund those purchases, the manufacturing plants that create those cars, there may be a lack of capacity to increase cars of both types at the same time. And you listed the other factors, the lack of locomotion power, personnel, track capacity, that also played a role.
And haven't there been efforts made since that 2013-14 period to free up more rail in terms of capacity?
There may have been.
Well, didn't Professor Babcock talk about that in his testimony?
I cannot testify to Mr. Babcock's testimony.
Did you review his testimony?
I reviewed his testimony.
That's all the questions I have, and I would offer Exhibit 22.
Mr. Taylor, I believe that we've already entered Exhibit 22 into the record.
Okay.
If I'm incorrect on that, I'll fix it.
I
and
wasn't sure.
we'll-
I asked the court reporter this morning, and that wasn't one of them that I was.
It's written on my list.
Okay, that's fine with me.
All right. Mr. Murray,
I pass on this witness.
Mr. Prey,
Thank you. I do have some questions. Ms. Cubb, do you have EK1 available to you? And I'll be looking, I think, at page 36.
Yes, sir. Page 36.
Am I correct if I say that this USDA report mentions Council Bluffs, Iowa in the context of increased rail or increased transportation costs on this page at the bottom paragraph?
Yes, sir.
And am I also correct that this is really the only instance where increased transportation costs are mentioned relative to the state of Iowa specifically
In this study,
in this study?
Yeah.
Now, you were in the Midwest during the summer of 2014, correct?
yes, I was.
And you were aware that the barge terminals in Council Bluffs were shut down during much of the summer.
I do not keep track of the barge terminals in Council Bluffs. Very little grain, if any, is shipped on barge terminals from Council Bluffs.
You are aware that there are a large number of shippers in Council Bluffs that do ship grain by barge to Louisiana.
No, I was not aware.
You are aware, however, that the barge terminals were shut down during 2014.
No, sir, I do not keep track of that data.
You are aware that the Missouri River flooded in 2014.
2014.
2014.
I'm I'm sorry, my recollection of the weather, it may be so.
Looking at your testimony on page 3 of your main direct.
Mr. Prey?
Yeah.
Yeah, remember to talk into the mic.
Right,
please.
this is really hard to work with. This microphone, it felt like a 1-inch distance. On line 3, I think it is. Oh, excuse me, line 9. You talk about in recent years, the rail network has experienced a growth in rail traffic as well as change in the types of commodities shipped via rail. My question is that do you attribute that to a backlog of grain cars in your testimony?
Is that a question?
Yes.
Can you restate the
We're
question?
talking about, is there a, in the next sentence you say, these changes have resulted in congestion, falling rail system speeds, increased shipper complaints. And then you go on to say, for example, in 2013 and 2014, major railroads experienced nearly unprecedented backlogs of grain cars, requiring many grain shippers to pay additional premiums for guaranteed delivery. When you say that there's a backlog, my question is whether there's a not enough grain cars, empty grain cars in the wrong places, or a backlog of grain cars. They're just stacked up. Which one of those?
I can see this is not the most clear sentence I've ever written. And what this is referring to is the backlog of loaded grain cars that sat dwelling without receiving service from the railroads, sometimes for weeks at a time.
And when you write this, is this based on the exhibit EK1, which is the USDA study?
I suspect that the data I'm referring to in my direct testimony in this paragraph is based on exhibit EK3 or the supporting data for exhibit EK3.
Let me pull that up. I guess I'll get to EK3 later. In the sentence that we just talked about from page 3 of your direct testimony, I see that you do not cite rail shipments of crude in that paragraph.
Is that a question?
Yes, I don't see the word. I mean, are you talking about grain cars not being able to be shipped? You don't mention crude oil cars.
I mentioned a change in the types of commodities shipped via rail.
Going on down to the next section. In lines 19 through 23, you offer coal, large harvests, and then add increased volumes of crude oil. That's correct?
Yes, sir.
You note that weather in 2014 caused lower speeds during that winter. Is that also correct?
That is mentioned here, yes.
And I guess going back to my other questions, we had bad weather in 2014 basically all year, but are you talking about the flooding in the western part of Iowa? Or are you talking about bad winter conditions?
In this sentence, the particularly cold temperatures in the winter of 2014, this is referring to early 2014, January, February, the very cold temperatures.
That led, when the upper Midwest melted, it caused Missouri to flood. Do you remember that now? Still nothing?
Actually, in my recollection,
Okay.
2014 wasn't the year that was the most drastic recent flooding of the Missouri River.
And we've had a number of years of
Yeah.
flooding on the Missouri. Now, you cite, I think that on page 4, lines 1 through 5 of your direct testimony,
Yes, sir.
that Iowa is experiencing similar rail problems. You answer the question. I take it that on line 1, when there's a question mark, is Iowa experiencing similar rail service problems? That's similar to what? The problems in the upper Midwest? The upper Midwest?
Yes.
You cite, however, there's 10,000 carloads of crude that go through Iowa each year on line 4 of page 4.
No, sir. What this is saying is there was an increase of 10,000 or more carloads of crude oil. So from the 2007 number to the 2012 number, there is an increase of 10,000.
The current number is 40,000. So the increase would have been gone from 30,000 carloads to 40,000, if you know that. If you don't know, just say, I don't know.
I couldn't testify to that
Okay.
exactly.
But 10,000 carloads of crude, if I divide that by 110 unit train, that'll be 90 trains per year. If I divide it by 100 unit train, that would be 100 unit trains per year.
That
that
math
correct?
sounds correct.
Yes. And maybe you won't agree with this, but only 100 trains per year, I think that comes down to one every several days. Is that correct?
That math sounds correct. Now, what effect that has on congestion is harder to predict.
Well, I suppose when you drive here every day, you go past the UP yard, and there's a lot of trains that go through Iowa.
Yes, sir.
Hundreds of unit trains every day. So based on your experience, I've looked you up on the internet. It seems like you know a lot of things. One unit train every several days is not very much in comparison to the total rail traffic in the state of Iowa. Is that true?
That's your characterization, yes.
Do you agree with that characterization?
More or less.
Now, we have these one train every several days rumbling through Iowa with the crude. And this is after the Bakken production fields have reached their maximum capacity in history.
Objection, Your Honor.
Please
Mr.
state
Prey
your
is
objection.
clearly testifying. There's no evidence to support what he's saying here.
Mr. Prey, can you restate the question?
I believe the record is very complete, showing all the graphs that Mr. Taylor has thrown up on the wall, that the amount of crude being produced in North Dakota has peaked.
Are you restating the question, or are you?
No, I guess I'm arguing with Mr. Dublinsky that I'm not testifying. I'm basing my question is based on the testimony that's been accepted by the court already.
Then I would ask that you refer to that to that exhibit that's been
Okay.
presented.
Ms. Cub, do you agree that the exhibit, I think it was 22 or 23 that Mr. Taylor threw up, that shows that the Bakken, or let's call it the North Dakota crude oil production, has peaked in recent years?
Absolutely not. It shows that there was a short-term downtrend in recent months. It also showed downtrends in the past. I mean, we'd have to bring up these exhibits from yesterday
Okay.
that showed, bumps in production in the past and then a subsequent increase in production to a new high. So no, knowing what I know about cyclical commodity trends, I'm in no way prepared to suggest that price or production in North Dakota has peaked.
Well, perhaps I'm using a insider term inadvertently, peak. I'm not talking about peak oil here. I'm just saying that the graph has gone up. In the last 10 years, the production, we'll say this, in the last 10 years, isn't it true that the production in North Dakota is unprecedented? If we go back before 10 years, we don't see those kinds of production numbers.
In North Dakota, no, that's correct.
Okay, that was my point. Now, given that fact, now I have to try to remember what my question was. Given the fact that we have unprecedented production in North Dakota, the total impact in Iowa, according to your testimony, is one train every several days through the state of Iowa.
No, and you're the one who just recently said 40,000, right? The 10,000 number was an increase. So,
Right. I'm
So if
talking
it's
about the
40,000, then
increase.
we're talking about 4 trains per day, just, to be clear. And in my testimony here, we're talking about 2007 to 2012. I pulled this 10,000 number directly from a DOT statistic, and I would point out that crude oil production continued to increase after 2012. So, I don't know how the DOT would state this if we go to 2014, for instance.
Yeah, and I'll clarify, I'm only speaking about the extra production caused by, or I guess the extra number of cars caused by the increase in production according to your statistics.
According to this statistic, which unfortunately, I wish I had included something that went up to 2014. It probably would have been more instructive.
Now, you've cited the USDA study, EK1. In your testimony, have you cited any other studies that support the concept that grain prices in Iowa are depressed because of crude oil shipments?
This is the academic study that I used and based my own subsequent study and research on, yes.
Have you cited any of those other studies or research in your testimony?
Give me a moment to review. I mean, depending what you want for studies, right? Do you want peer-reviewed scientific studies? I don't know. But we can go through Exhibit EK3, page 26, roughly. We don't have to do this. This is the bibliography of the paper that I wrote for the American Farm Bureau, relies on a study from the Soy Transportation Coalition, relies on this USDA study, relies on studies by the Association of American Railroads, relies on profiles from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, and others.
Okay, show me in EK3 where you show the depressed grain price in Iowa due to rail shipments of crude oil.
EK3 refers to Iowa in the same sense that my testimony here does, in the sense that when the agriculture industry nationally has to prepare for freight capacity in the future, Iowa agriculture producers paid very close attention to the effects that were felt in the Dakotas. So my testimony here is based on my review and my knowledge of the Iowa cash grain markets.
So
And I would
asked-
say that Iowa has been affected.
I asked you a question to identify an EK3 where there was a study that showed a depressed grain price in Iowa due to rail shipments of crude oil, and I didn't hear you give me an answer.
I know of no such study that has specifically addressed Iowa, and that, is perhaps a failing of the land grant university in this state not to put forth that data. So I relied on my own analysis of the cash grain bids in Iowa.
Can you turn to page 11, at least down the lower right-hand corner, of EK3? There's a map on that page.
Yes, sir.
And if the staff can get that up before I ask any questions. One more down. Next map down, I think. It's a map with all the green lines all over it.
That's
Are
page
you
12
wanting
of the
page
exhibit.
12?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Page 12, please.
Okay. Yeah, it's page 11 on down the lower right-hand corner, but page 12 of the document. There we go. Now, this map shows, look at the title, and you correct me if I'm wrong, it shows the freight flows by tons moved on railways, highways, and inland waterways. First off, I note that the barge traffic is in blue. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And there's a little blue line that goes right up to, it's kind of hidden by the green there, which goes over it, but it goes up toward Council Bluffs. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So that would indicate there is barge traffic originating in that area, heading south down to parts downstream.
I know of shippers who ship rock and gravel on that route, yes.
And the green line going across looks like it roughly goes across the Union Pacific line there, right outside our front door here. That's a big green stripe all the way across the state of Iowa, correct?
Yes, sir.
The one below it would probably be the Burlington Northern line. You aware of that line down there?
Yes, sir.
I don't see any real traffic between North Dakota going through Iowa. Looks like it goes through Minneapolis. Is that correct?
I show a lot of interconnected opportunities for rail traffic to move in many directions.
And they're really skinny out there in South Dakota, aren't they?
Yes, sir.
I do show one line which goes from the Powder River Basin in South Dakota down to, looks like Omaha, Council Bluffs. But other than that, I'm not seeing any real traffic from North Dakota that goes through Iowa based on this map and by volume. And the volume is the size of the lines.
You don't see any?
It looks to me like it'd be very difficult to get if you're looking at the volumes to go from North Dakota to Iowa.
I disagree with that characterization.
Just to be clear, in the USDA study, Iowa is not part of the upper Midwest. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You aware that, I'll strike that. Are you aware that Iowa has a denser rail infrastructure than North Dakota and South Dakota?
Yes, sir.
Are you aware that Iowa has more ethanol plants than North Dakota and South Dakota?
I don't know the exact numbers, but that sounds correct.
Are you aware that there are more biodiesel plants that use soybeans in Iowa than North Dakota and South Dakota?
Again, I don't have the exact numbers, but that sounds reasonable.
And you're aware that almost all the corn in Iowa goes straight to value-added industries like ethanol plants?
Which are also reliant on efficient freight. Yes.
I asked this of another witness. You were sitting in the gallery at the time. Maybe you know the answer. Are you aware that, and I'll call them by their technical name, hazardous materials tanker cars, which are used to haul ethanol and oil, are currently being stored around the Midwest?
No, sir, I have not witnessed this.
All right. I have no further questions.
Mr. Sandgren?
Yes, Your Honor. Just a few questions, Ms. Cub. First, thank you for coming to Iowa to testify today. Is this the first time you've testified for the IUB or some other administrative agency?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, it's my first time too. I guess I don't have a lot of questions. I just wanted to back up a second to one of your responses to Mr. Prey. I believe he was talking about Mr. Taylor's Exhibit 22, where you had characterized the downturn in oil production in South Dakota as short term. Is that correct?
I suspect you're referring to North Dakota.
North Dakota, yes.
Yes. I don't know which exhibit we should be
It doesn't-
referring to, but yes, we've
Sure.
seen yesterday, charts that showed a short-term downturn in oil production in North Dakota.
What expertise do you have in oil production in North Dakota?
0.
So that's a personal opinion, not an expert opinion.
It's an expert opinion about commodity cycles. I am a commodity market analyst, but the oil production, no, sir.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that. One other thing in your direct testimony, let me pull it up here. You speak towards the I guess the costs of the rail congestion to Iowa farmers, and you use I don't know. To me, I don't follow the math. So maybe you can illustrate that to me. You talk about that there is an estimated 45,000 active farmers in Iowa.
Can you
That's
tell me
correct.
what page I should be looking at?
Sorry, page 5 of 6.
Okay.
We're looking at 10 down, line 10 down.
Yes, sir.
You're looking at 45,000 active farmers in Iowa. Is that correct?
That's the number I received from the Iowa Corn Board.
Okay. And then based on that, you suspect that the average farmer produced 52,609 bushels of corn and 11,238 bushels of soybeans?
Yes, sir.
Do farmers regularly produce both at the same time?
Yes, sir.
And I have no point of reference. Is that a reasonable number for the average Iowa farmer?
Yes, sir. I mean, Many would have more, some would have less. Yes, that's average.
Okay, so then further down, looking at the U.S., you say the USDA estimated the transport increased transport costs. I believe earlier in your testimony you said that increased transport cost was transferred to the final buyer. Is that correct?
It works both ways, and typically it is borne by the farmer. So a grain shipper, like an elevator, will have a bid for grain and then have to, deliver that grain at a certain price point to a customer that is generally price sensitive. So when freight prices increase, the typical way that the grain market absorbs the increased freight costs is to lower the basis prices paid to the farmers.
So you're saying that the price paid by the end user does not factor in transportation costs whatsoever. That cost
That's
is
not what I'm
entirely borne
saying.
by
I'm
the farmer.
saying that both sides end up absorbing some of these increased freight costs.
How is that split?
It depends on the transaction.
Okay, so this figure of 17 cents and 11 cents, that's not necessarily representative of the reality of the situation.
I believe it is.
Then that doesn't account for the cost borne by the end user.
Right. I think that the USDA study was only considering, when they calculated the 17 cents per bushel for corn, reduced corn prices in the basis, and 11 cents is reduced soybean prices, they were calculating that portion that is borne by the farmers. They really didn't address the other costs that are borne by the agriculture industry, the end users, the processors who must also pay the increased freight prices for ethanol tanker cars, for instance. So these 17 cents, 11 cents, I believe the USDA authors of that study were looking specifically at farmer-borne costs, but there are other costs as well.
Have you reviewed or written any studies concerning that cost that's passed on to the end user?
No, that's all pretty much private data. It's very, that would be data that the railroad might be able to provide, but no, there's no data that I could use to do that.
Okay. I believe that that's all my questions.
Mr. Putney,
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. I have a large number of questions. Looking at EK1, it would be page 4.
Okay.
At the top of this, on line 4, you say that from 2007 to 2012, Iowa experienced an increase of 10,000 or more carloads of crude oil. If I am correct, and I believe this is from your own testimony and your prior exhibits, 105 cars equal a train. That's certainly less than 100 trains, and this is over a 5-year period or 6-year period. Is that correct?
Well, to be clear, I think that you're referring to my direct testimony, page 4.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Isn't that okay? I'm sorry. Your direct testimony.
I pulled up the wrong exhibit. Sorry. So
I'm
my
sorry.
direct testimony.
Yes.
And okay. So what was your question?
Okay. You said that from 2007 to 2012, this is again lines 3 and 4
Mhm.
at page 4. There was an increase of 10,000 or more carloads, which at 105 trains per car, or per 105 cars per train, is less than 100 trains in that 6-year period. So if I look at that in that sense, and again, this depends on the Bakken oil production figures, which we'll get to in a minute. Okay, that's 100 or less cars divided by 6 is 10 to 15 trains per year increase. If this isn't some kind of a ratable increase over those years, 2007 to 2012. Is that correct?
This is correct in the same way that We've discussed this with Mr. Swinton earlier, yes.
Okay. Can I have a runner? This is an addition to Mrs. Cub and the board. Okay. No, they're all attached. Yes, but this is the complete documentation. I'll explain. You give one of these to Mrs. Cub and the rest of these to the board, and got 5 copies. That's how, and the rest of these go to everyone.
Thank you.
While this is being passed out, let me explain what this document is. I looked at the Bakken oil production from 2012, 13, and 14, and 15. Exhibit 5.
Your Honor, can I ask that Mr. Puntney hold off till we have a chance to see the document?
Okay.
Yes. I would just like to remind all of the parties that you do need to have at least 30 copies for us to hand out. We will take a 10-minute break while you get the copies to them.
Great.
Thanks for being here. All eyes on the Iowa Utility Board these days and whether they will approve plans for an oil pipeline running right across the state.
A Texas-based company wants to transport 500,000 barrels of North Dakota crude oil a day through 18 counties in Iowa. Mark Tauschek is live at the state capitol with news of a new group entering this debate. Mark.
Well, 19 different groups, many of the nonprofit, environmentally friendly variety, have banded together to form a coalition, and their goal is to stop the Bakken pipeline.
Thank you all very much for...
They call themselves the Bakken Pipeline Resistance Coalition, 19 groups representing landowners, interest groups, and nonprofits coming together.
We know that it's very possible to stop this if we work together as a state.
A handful of objections.
They dropped off an official objection to the pipeline at the office of the Iowa Utilities Board, who will decide whether or not to approve the project and if the energy company can use eminent domain to take property from unwilling landowners.
I want our farm ground to go to the future of my community and to my family, to our daughters.
Good morning. My name is Wally Taylor.
Wally Taylor is an environmental attorney and chair of the Iowa chapter of the Sierra Club. He says the Army Corps of Engineers and the DNR also have to approve permits to greenlight the Bakken pipeline.
There'll be a number of major rivers, wildlife areas, and so on that this project will cross, and so we're going to challenge the issuance of these sovereign lands permits.
He says if one of those entities denies a permit, the pipeline is dead.
The goal is to get all three. We hope we get at least one.
At this point, I'm in favor of it. I think it's an important project that would help continue to build our energy independence.
State Senator Jack Whitver says the pipeline would build infrastructure and jobs. He says his concern is protecting the property rights of Iowa landowners and thinks the pipeline could happen without requiring eminent domain.
I think it's possible. I was talking with Governor Rick Perry a while ago about a similar project down there, and from what I understand, the pipelines are a little more flexible in where they can go and where they can't go, and hopefully they could do it without the use of eminent domain.
Well, the Utilities Board does not have a timeline for a decision. In fact, a spokesperson this afternoon for the Utilities Board told me that he cannot guarantee there's going to be a decision this year. There may be one next year. Reporting live in Des Moines, Mark Tauschek, KCCI 8.
To transport the oil, Lowenbro Construction is building an 80-mile pipeline through ground frozen solid by temperatures as low as 20 degrees below zero. Digging through this frozen tundra takes a truly awesome machine. This is the Tesmec 1075 trencher. Weight, 44 tons. Digging depth, 7 feet. Digging width, 40 inches. The 325 horsepower diesel engine gives the enormous earth mover the grunt to shift 2,700 tons of dirt every hour.
This particular trencher is heavy enough that you can go down 7.5 feet and dig all day long if you need to.
The Tesmec's amazing. It replaces 3 track hoses all in one go. That means that we can dig our trenches in super fast time.
What's going on here?
Okay. We have a couple of objection letters against the Bakken pipeline, and one of them goes to the board, Utilities Board, and the other one to the governor. Yeah, because we very much want to stop that. It's carrying like the dirtiest of the oils anyway, and all manner of things have come into conflict, like eminent domain and all of those very basic things that people have been fighting against since the beginning of time in this country. Okay. So yeah, so we're taking a stand, but you know, this is a very special place here. Very special, caring, and sustainability is very high. Yeah, the university has one of the best universities for sustainability. And Fairfield has been named one of the greenest towns in America
Okay.
for quite some time.
And so is this a local effort here?
Yes.
So what would you say to people about the pipeline? If you could talk to the people of Iowa, what would you ask?
I say that it will do a number of things. Each thing we can stop like this, each transport we can stop this, then that means the closer we get to stopping the fracking. That's the big thing, is the destruction of the Mother Earth, the using the water, destroying the water, all of it. So that's what I would say.
Okay.
Each step you can take.
He and I talked. I just was, okay.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. A guilty plea by former state lawmaker Ed Fallon may put his criminal case to rest, but not the issue that led to his arrest.
Fallon was arrested last week on charges of trespassing in Governor Branstad's office over the proposed Bakken oil pipeline through Iowa. KCCI's Marcus McIntosh is live at the Capitol with more on how close the pipeline is to becoming a reality.
Stacey and Kevin, Fallon was joined by landowners and community action groups who all say the pipeline is bad business. On a dirt road in Newton, there is a stockpile of pipes that continues growing. The half hour we were there, 3 trucks brought in even more pipes. But the communications manager of the Iowa Utilities Board says despite this stockpile, nothing has been decided or granted.
They do so at their own risk since the petition for permit is still being reviewed and it has not been granted yet.
Tormey says there is no timeline as to when a decision will be made.
I'm sorry, you can't stay.
Former Iowa lawmaker Ed Fallon was arrested for trespassing, trying to meet with the governor about the proposed pipeline and the possible use of
We will, at
eminent.
this time, move to Mr. Krazik for questions.
Iowa is installing additional wind power, and we're converting coal plants to natural gas. That will reduce coal shipments, and in your opinion, will that free up additional rail capacity?
Yes, sir, absolutely. We are seeing that already in 2015. Coal shipments happen to be down a little bit. And as shipments of these other classes of commodities go down in number, we absolutely see a wonderful knock-on effect in the overall freight prices and therefore much stronger grain basis this year. So
Thank
if we
you
can
very
take oil off of the traffic, oil traffic off of the rail lines, that should also have that same effect.
No further questions, Madam Chair.
I have no questions of this witness.
Mr. Wells.
I also have no questions of this witness.
Are our copies made yet? I am going to move out of order and go to the consumer advocate unless there's objection. Mr. Long?
Yes, thank you. Many of my questions